This is the Mettle podcast, and I am your host, Coach Thomann. I'm a former athlete, teacher, coach, and athletic director that switched careers after surviving cancer and a stroke in the fall of 2020. But I'm also a dad of a son and a daughter that were successful high school athletes that went on to college. Now I use that experience along with my ICF coaching certification when helping teams, coaches, and athletes from all over the country. Each week, I will pose a specific question that will help coaches of all types better understand mental toughness. In the Mettle podcast, coaches will learn to help their athletes overcome adversity without being the adversity they need to overcome. Welcome back to the Mettle podcast. Once again, your host here, Coach Thomann, with my guest today, Casey Heimer. Casey, our paths have intertwined in multiple ways. I first got to know Casey when I was coaching girls basketball. And oh man, not just because you're on the podcast, but Casey was one of my absolute favorite officials. And I can tell you a whole lot of reasons, not because he called everything my way and we were friends. We weren't friends at the point. Let me make sure that's clear. We have your integrity to hold up here, Casey. But the fact at the way that Casey would allow conversations to happen and his demeanor as a referee that's what made him my favorite. And he always ran a really good crew. And then the second way we intertwined is whenever I decided, I had my stroke and I realized I didn't want to do administration anymore, and decided I wanted to get into coaching. I was in on who might be my replacement as the athletic director and assistant principal at Deer Creek Mackinac Junior High. And Casey's resume came across the desk, and Mitch Holmgren and I, who was the AD at the high school at the same time, we were both like, hey, this is like, I can't imagine, like, Casey has the demeanor. If you have the right demeanor as an official, you've got the right demeanor for an athletic director. It's the policing and the refereeing that you have to do all the time with parents and things like that. Very, very similar. So Casey took my job, and then he's since moved on, and he's still in educational administration, but he's also still officiating. So
yeah.
And then now we still converse and talk, and I just really wanted to have Casey on here for the perspective of an official as far as mentality goes. This podcast is geared for coaches to gain information on how they can lead their teams, lead their programs. And I think there's a lot to be said for how to work. This is the wrong way to say it, how to work an official, but how to deal with an official the right way, the wrong way, how to lead your team in that regard. And so, Casey, that's a lot of an intro, but thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man. Your words are very kind. I appreciate it. Like, it's funny, your perspective as a coach and what you just said, all those same things that you just said about coaches and how they build a relationship, a sustained relationship, a healthy one with an official from a game-to-game basis is challenging, right? So as you develop those skills, like, know this, officials are constantly trying to improve in that same way too, right? Because it has to go both ways. And it's interesting because often the benefit that I had in going and working with certain coaches is you do develop a relationship over time. But now that I'm in my 12th year of officiating and I have some relationships with guys that I've built up over time, that's way different now than it was when they first met me, right? When I had that first game with them, when there wasn't that. And a lot of coaches work a lot of games, and some of them are with guys who they have a relationship with, and they know, oh, I can jive back and forth with this guy, and some of them are like, I can't jive back and forth with that guy, and so there's it's a delicate ecosystem, right, that we work within, and how to take in all those different relational complexities matters. But we'll talk a lot about consistency too in this podcast, I'm sure, because as a referee, that is one of the biggest things that you have to have. And so not just relational consistency, but judgment consistency, and not perfect by any means, but we do our best, no doubt.
It's funny as you talk about you get on doing it 12 years now. You go from, I'm sure that first time you officiate with a guy, with a coach, it goes from hey, like getting their attention, just saying hey, and now they know your name. It's like, Casey, come on. You can't let my guys do that. And it changes the talk and changes the conversation.
Yeah, it does. And I think because I will say this: there's blessings and curses. I think a little bit as an official of officiating coaches and their teams that you've come to officiate for a long time, for year after year. I mean, I would say it's not a fabrication to say 60 to 75% of the games I work every year, it's a reoccurring coach, right? So you have that longevity, but guys also know, like you just said, like you have renown and appreciation for what and who I was as an official. Nothing you said was about judgment. It was all about relationships. It was all about communication. It was all about maybe the nonverbals, not just the verbals that I was giving, right? And so I think coaches pick up on those things too. It's funny that you have admiration. I'm sure there's coaches out there who don't have admiration for me, and that's kind of part of what every official has to be self-aware of always. And you're only as good as your last game in the current game that you're in, and that changes. And not just you're only not as good as every game. You're only as good as every from call to call. In the eyes of a coach.
You just said you're as good as your last game, and I'm like, no, you're as good as your last call. Like that's it's such. You're right. It's so delicate. The amount of emotion involved is just it's crazy.
It is. And I forget who said this to me, but I think that this part remains. Some of it remains true. A lot of people, when they cross over the threshold of a gymnasium door in any capacity, someone told me that we all turn into the worst parts of ourselves, the darkest parts of ourselves. I think there's something that's true about that. I would just argue that it's competition. It's competitive nature. Like we all enter in our competitive mode, and that's coaches, that's players, that's parents, because we want to advocate for and defend our own children. And but it's officials too. Officials are competitive, and so they want to be great, and they hold themselves to a standard of excellence too. And officials are different because they're almost competing against themselves, right? They're competing for their own, for lack of better terms, their PR, right? Their personal record, whatever. You can't measure that, you can't quantify it, but we're competitive too. So I think how you go about, and obviously, even though you're competitive, you're always competing. How to do that well though, and appropriate and healthy and productive, is a huge part of competition, right? And so
maybe I'll get into that here in a minute, but first let's back up. What is your I know it, but what's your athletic background?
Yeah, so small school sports athlete, extremely small. So I guess in terms of just to quantify for everybody, Illinois has 4-class basketball. So my school was the same conference as DMAC growing up, where your family was at, Matt. But so small school, so played 3 sports, but basically played 3 sports because I had a pulse, and and if you're semi-athletic, you played, So
but you don't even have to be semi-athletic, right?
Yeah, exactly. So but small accolades. I mean, so just a fine player, all conference player, but small schools. So enjoyed it, had a blast, had great coaches, a great community that I grew up in that backed, supported, and was passionate about their sport. So that was great. Was committed to play Division III football. Long story super short, Dad had a heart attack. Decided not to for a variety of reasons, but started. Funny enough, officiating is what we're going to talk about mostly, but was a coach, and so started coaching right away football back at my alma mater in college. Started teaching in Unit 5, then started coaching football at Normal Community High School for 5 years. And so for a lot of my officiating career, basketball, I was a football coach during the fall season. And so it was, which I think was super beneficial for me entering into officiating, having that experience and kind of having that perspective. I think it was really crucial. I think it allowed for me to empathize. I think it allowed for me to kind of have spent some time on the coach's side of things and kind of start to get at what are the things as a coach that I respect and love to see in an official. So I'm so grateful and honored that you started talking about me as an official from a communication standpoint, just how I presented myself and how I was willing to talk to coaches, because that's something that I desired as a coach. And so I think that kind of plays into that. But that's kind of my athletic background and kind of just a brief part of my professional background with sports, and still an official, and now I'm coaching my own daughter's youth basketball team. So now I'm a coach in a different capacity
That's a
again.
whole
But
nother
yeah,
that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother time, Casey.
yep,
I could speak volumes on it. Um, but it's interesting though when you're talking about, oh, I just played at a small school, I was just
yeah,
a 1A, things like that. I think that the level of passion in basketball especially is
yeah,
inversely proportional to the size. Like
yeah,
I mean I played 1A basketball as well, and it was the only, like, my high school didn't have football. Like it was like
yeah,
that was it, right? Like
yeah,
everybody in town was there. It
yep,
was standing room only.
yep,
And I think that what that means is, yes, the level of competition is less, right? And it doesn't mean that you're going to, like, if you want to go to college, you're probably going to be behind the 8 ball because you haven't played against that many good at that guys, and that happens. But as far as the pressure and the anxiety and just how you feel in those moments, I don't think it gets much better than really good,
yeah.
some of that 1A, 2A basketball.
I agree. I affirm that statement wholeheartedly, and I don't just say that. Uh, it's in my practice. I still choose to have 75-80% of my games be at the 1A 2A level as an official for all the reasons that you just said. And though there's great atmospheres, great environments to walk into at the higher level for sure. I find the smaller school ball to be more aligned with. I don't just say that because I grew up in it. It just more aligns with me and kind of the type of environments I like walking into as an official, and the things I feel like I feel like they align more with my gifting. Maybe is a good way to say it as an official, but I wholeheartedly agree, and I will never say that it means more at the smaller schools, but sometimes it does mean a
No,
little bit more. So
yeah, but I mean, it takes a special kind of person, meaning you, to say, I want to throw myself into this fire every Friday night because you know you're getting it.
you are, and I think that and I think as an official and as an official, there's such a blessing and a curse. I've already mentioned that, of kind of going to the same schools year after year, but I think it is so important, and I think kind of knowing the fire that you're walking into from school to school is different. And I think great officials have to be willing, though my convictions, my judgment, my charisma should be consistent. I think you have to be contextually aware, right? You have to be aware of kind of the environment, of the crowd, of certain players, and kind of use those things to inform you. And if you're not allowing it to inform you, then you're doing a real disservice, I think, to the game. And so you have to still be flexible, I think, in a lot of those things, for sure.
I mean, basketball means more to people than it should, right?
Yeah,
And the wins, let's be honest,
100%.
but
Yeah,
it doesn't change the fact that some of the calls that you make or don't make on a Friday night can absolutely make or break a lot of people's happiness.
it
Like
does.
you,
Yeah,
they are dependent on you. And there's a whole
yeah,
thing I could talk about that, but like
yeah,
it's not the right way to be, but they are 100% dependent on how you want to
yeah.
blow that whistle.
And I think early on, and this is, as I think any official will agree with this. Um, that has changed in my 12 years. Obviously, as a first year official, I was like, in fact, I'd be okay if no one was present, if no one was there, because and now I want it to be packed. I want it to be packed to the rafters, not because I don't. not that I'm saying I don't care about the emotions of other people and how I'm affecting them, but I think I've matured in my officiating to the point where that's not why I'm there. I'm there. I'm simply. I think I mean this wholeheartedly. Um, I'm there to help. I'm there to be
Yeah.
helpful. And I think when that shifts of I'm just regardless of atmosphere, environment, reaction to me, my purpose is to be helpful. And yes, are there still some times that in my competitive I'm human? Do I get still worked up in a game? Yes, but I think it fuels me where before it would have repulsed me, and now um, I want it to be a great game. I want it to be close. I want it to be competitive, because I think that now aligns more with the skill set that I have, and I think it just as a competitor, I want great competition, and so yeah, I don't know if that answers the question or if that leads you into something else, but that I
No,
really
it
do.
definitely what it leads to me is, but I'm just gonna ask this: What's the best insult you've received?
Yeah. Oh, good one.
I mean, you got
I
to
mean,
get them right.
honestly, it's so funny because yeah. The best insult I've received is I mean, it actually isn't going to sound that great, but it actually gets to me the most is like when someone will make like as a varsity official when will say like that's a junior high call, Casey. That's a
Mm.
JV call, Casey. Like, and I'm just like in my head like that one I think it's probably the best insult because it actually does like perturb me a little bit. Like maybe I'm ousting myself. So if anyone here is like watching this, they'll now know what to say to get under my skin.
Yeah.
Um, and that's also that's one of the curses of working at the same schools over and over again is people know my first name. And
Yeah. Oh,
and so
that's what I was saying. But you've been there. People know you, right?
people know me, right? And um, so I think like when they say that I'm making a call that isn't vindicated for the level of competition, I guess. So, and here in my head, I'm like, I'm just administering the rules of the game in accordance with with what people have established. But yeah,
Well, yeah, but there is so much. There is as much as the officials try to do it, and as much as the IHSA has to do it. There is so much left to interpretation.
yeah, yeah,
It
there is.
just is. And yeah, I don't know how and that's what we're talking about, the consistency. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I think, and that's where I think I don't have a clear cut answer for that, but I'll give an answer in this way. I really do believe, Matt, that being a great official, to your point, is if I were to give a pie chart, I would say 25 to 30% of it is probably judgment. Like I really believe that, and I think the other 75 to 70% is communication, persona, nonverbals, because I think no matter what, to be fair to all fans, coaches, no one expects perfection. Though they're going to complain about a call, they know that there's a human element of the game and that it is subjective. And I feel like though not everybody would just say that, or though people are still going to complain, I feel like there is that understanding, right? And so, but I think knowing that most of it, in my opinion, that makes that what because I'm gonna be honest, Matt. Like there are from a judgment standpoint, there are better officials than me. Like you could have had better guys on that I think are probably more consistent at making the right calls and administering um, the rules of the game. But I would say what I have say is my skill set and my gifting is probably more along the lines of that of the nonverbals. It's how you carry yourself. I mean, the whole idea of like selling a call, looking confident, communicating well. Um, you you still have to have great judgment. Don't get me wrong in that. But I think but consistent in all those intangibles as an official, I think are really meaningful, not just to coaches, but meaningful to fans too and players. And so because I do think you can't make the wrong call every time. You do have to be really consistent with your calls and do have great judgment. But in the end, I don't think that's what people are going to remember about me as an official. And again, going back to how you introduced me, I love that you introduced me that way because it's you don't because you're not gonna, like, though my success as an official is from call to call, it's really not what people remember about me, and so it's about everything else, and um, so it is
I
subjective.
think I think here's what I think. As I don't think that you're talking about how other coaches or other refs might have been better administering the rules and whatever.
Yeah,
But I think that most coaches think that there is so much variability and so much interpretation that
yeah,
it is so much the consistency, right?
yeah,
As long as the guy, it's the first 3 or 4 minutes that we figure out, okay, this is how this guy is going to call this, or this
yep,
gal is going to call this,
yep,
and then we adjust accordingly.
correct.
It's the ones that we get upset with are the ones that change how they call
Yeah,
a game as they
yeah,
go. I,
you're
I don't
right.
I don't think it matters. Like I don't know. Yes, there's some that are better than others at
Yeah,
judgment and knowing the
yeah,
rules and things like that. But I mean, honestly, I was at a high school game the other day, and there was and this isn't in your area, you would know the guy, but and he's an official that's been around for a long time,
yeah,
and I I he made an entire game. I doubt he made more than his whistle blew more than 5 times, right?
yeah, yep,
Because his style, if you want to call it that, his style might have been just showing up to get the paycheck, but his style was just don't call anything, and
yeah,
and it didn't, and it didn't. It was still a great game,
yeah,
and though it came down to a tip in at the buzzer,
yeah,
and there was a lot of shoving in there.
yeah,
But Dan called it all game, right?
yeah,
So really, you couldn't complain about it, right?
yeah,
Because the
yeah,
consistency was there. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken feathers, or perhaps you've heard it or even said the other version. Regardless, good coaches should not blame a lack of success on the players they get to coach. It's a lame excuse, and I'm sorry if that ruffles your feathers. But it's your job as a coach to develop your players. If your athletes lack skill or mental toughness, it's your responsibility to develop it. But how do you make today's athlete tougher without risking breaking them? Well, Mental Metal Coaching now offers professional development for coaches explaining how to do just that. The program is called Ember to Inferno, Building Mentally Tough Athletes. It teaches real tools and tangible methods that are proven to increase the mental health and toughness of athletes. The program is available as an in-person seminar or as virtual small group coaching. Don't wish for mentally tough athletes. Build them. Contact Mental Metal Coaching today. Mettle is a person's ability to face adversity in a spirited and resilient manner. It is a great skill to have for athletics and for life, but it is not something we are born with. If you want it, you have to forge your mettle. And if you listen to the Mental Metal podcast, you already know that, but not everybody else does yet. So help me out by ordering and wearing some sweet The Mental Metal podcast gear. We've got short sleeve tees, long sleeve tees, and some super comfortable hoodies. Order online today and you can have your gear in no time. But the best part is that every order helps support the show and helps me spread the message that mental toughness is a trait that can and should be built. So find the link in the show notes, order your gear, and start showing that you know how to forge your mettle.
yeah. Yeah, and I think
You know,
what you're saying is again, Matt, so true because I just officiated a 3A 4A inner city basketball game last week, right? And that was on Wednesday, and then I turned around on Friday and I officiated a 1A 2A game, right? And I think well, one, the basketball games were entirely different, right? Like
yep.
how they went, how they flowed. The competition was different, so naturally, I think my officiating probably was different, like in a
Yeah.
sense, because but I think it should be, like because I think like those contextual layers, that nuance, was just different, and every game's going to have those variables, and so you're right, the rules aren't changing, were the exact same, but how I enforced how I enforced
Yeah.
it though was different because I think you have to, in a sense, administer to what you see, and like administer to the environment that you're in, and also like what not that I'm going off of what the coaches want, but like what does the flow of the game, what is the style of the game, how is that informing my calls too, and I think
Mhm.
like so you're right. It's subjective because there's so many different human elemental aspects to every single game, and though the rules are going to be the same from game to game, I think coaches, players, officials, what makes basketball so complex is just not just the human element from the official standpoint. It's the human element of everybody, and that's
Yeah.
coaches too, and that's players too, and
And
all those things inform, and they create this beautiful, what I call this
but
beautiful mess. It is a
it
beautiful mess
is.
sometimes.
I knew a coach. I'm not going to out him here, but you'll probably be able to figure out who it is. And he played a very hard nosed defensive style.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of games that he'd have players like he'd get in the bonus in the first quarter, and you'd be like, he's not going to have any players left by the end of the game. And when you'd ask him about it, he goes, they'll stop calling them. He's like, and he knew how to work he was like,
Yeah.
their human nature was going to be, well, okay, this game is going to be like that. We're just going to like rein it in. And he just figured out how it was a risk, right? But he understood it. And I was like, and he was usually right,
He was leveraging the aspect of every official that knows that they're there to manage. Like, I'm there to be helpful, but the officials are also trying to manage the game. And I know that sounds subjective, and I know there's nuance to that because there always will be. But we have to manage all of those variables, right? And those variables are playing style, personality. What is the foul situation? Where are we at? Like, and so I think if officials don't acknowledge that management matters, that management can dictate the flow and can at times not dictate calls, but I think every official would say in their honest, truest moments that um, those management variables do affect a little bit, I think, of kind of what you're looking at and how you're going to not interpret, but what you are going to blow your whistle on, right? And so because all officials, they know those star players, and we'll have conversations that he's on his fourth foul. Make sure the fifth one's a great one, and I think that, but I think that's not a bad thing. I think
I don't either.
it all goes down to management, because I think and just like the opposing coaches like drive at that player, he's on his fourth foul, right? So they're trying to manage it too. So all these things are kind of coinciding together, or it's like that coach has 0 timeouts left. Like, if he calls a timeout, or am I supposed to blow my whistle and give him the timeout? Well, yes, but am I also supposed to maybe say, if I'm right by him, are you sure? Are you sure?
Yeah. Right.
Like, yes. Like, I'm supposed to do all of those things. And I think, like, so there's the rule, but then there's the management side of what makes every official great. And I think
Right.
so yes, there is those like nuance, the kind of that management side, and you can't explicitly teach management of a game.
It's got to be difficult. Yeah.
But and it takes time. It takes years. As a principal, I tell teachers like, to be a great teacher, you need to teach 1,000 lessons. To be a great official, you need to officiate 1,000 games. Like, I think it's the same thing, because you have to see how just all the different complexities and situations, and allow those things to make you better. And I trust me, man, I have screwed up plenty of times, still do. I screw up all the time. But hopefully you as a coach or fans wouldn't know that I thought I just screwed up, and I think Carrie, and that's where I go to demeanor as an official, man, is so huge. It is so imperative. Demeanor as a coach is so imperative, right?
Well, let's get it. So I want to get into that, and I love this conversation, but I want to be talking about how a coach's demeanor, from your perspective, from the official's perspective, how does a demeanor towards an official and
Yeah.
this whole game management, how does it affect his players and his team? What do you see from your perspective?
Let me start with the idea that every coach's word actions incite something. They incite something. And so they incite either something really positive or they incite something negative, right? And so like players and fans of a coach's team will be incited by something, by the coach specifically, because they will be watching the coach and they will see what is his reaction. And depending on his reaction, not everybody, trust me, not everybody. But 90% of people, I think, will take something on very similar to their coach, for the most part. And so one, that's how I think a coach's demeanor. First thing, it has influence of his players and his fans and his parents, or and that team support and kind of following. The second thing I think is, like, for every coach to kind of think about is, as they reflect on kind of their relationship with an official, is what do I, when I talk to an official, is it more in statements or is it more in questions? And I think that's a really key part of a relationship from an official to a coach is, if coaches are making a lot of statements, they're probably not going to get a great working verbal relationship with an official. Naturally, like, basically speaking, because I think officials have sometimes wrongly, but I think for the most part rightly, we don't respond to statements. We respond to questions. And I think because I'm going to be honest, Matt. I've never responded to a statement, and I probably regretted it more of the time, because it just allowed for the coach to make more statements. But if they have a question, then I can respond with, okay, here's my perspective, here's my reasoning, here's why I made that call. And so I think those are the two biggest things that kind of come to mind right away, is that, though, just like my nonverbals, just like my demeanor, just like the things I say incite something out of a coach, the coach also has a lot to do with that. And so, and I think I always respect coaches. One who just, and again, this is not measurable, this isn't quantitative, but and every coach knows what I'm talking about. I love the coaches who 90% of their communication during the game is coaching. And I know that sounds like I know that sounds novice, elementary, but every official, if 90% of what they hear from a coach is just coaching his players, you're going to have a great game. I think not only will you have a great game, you might not have the right outcomes that you want, but you're going to have a successful game for the players, I think, is kind of what I'm getting at there. Winning or losing.
What you're saying is, if that ratio is not information and coaching directed at his players or her players,
Yes.
you're talking about it's, whether it's questions or statements, it's information and questions going to the official.
That's exactly right. And if a coach spends a lot of time making statements, because and honestly, statements have everything to do with the subjectivity or my judgment, typically, right? So it's like, oh, that's a bad call, that's not the right call. Those are very baseline statements, right? And if a coach does that, the players and the fans will start to mimic that as well, right? And so, and again, and now we're going back to inciting, right? Coach do, players do. And I think, but at the same time, I think great coaches also have the ability to tell his players and to model and to tell his players, like, that's my job, not yours, But I think and I think players, same thing. I, as an official, love players asking me questions. I don't love them making statements to me, because I don't think that is productive, right? Like, and so, and I hope I'm saying that well, Matt, where it doesn't come across as official arrogance, because it really isn't. It's just, it rarely is. Making statements rarely ends in productivity. I just believe that.
It's human nature. You are there more than any other person in the building. You have a better knowledge base of the rules.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, that's
Yeah.
your job. That's why you're there. You're brought in and you're being paid to do this as the authority. So whether it's arrogance or not, you're there to do, right?
Yeah,
That's
because
what
I
you're
know
there to
this,
do.
Matt, and you know this. Like, how many times did an official change your opinion? Probably rarely, right? Rarely do they
No.
change your opinion, right? So, so when I hear a statement, I'm not going to change your opinion, especially in the 5 second moment that I have to give you a response. So I think great officials are very calculated with what they respond to, how they respond to it, and great officials should respond to the best of their ability to questions, not to statements. And and sometimes I'll tell a coach that, if he's just statement after statement after statement after statement, I say I'll finally just be like, stop sign. Do you have a question? Do you have a question about something? Because I'll
Yeah.
answer a question. I'm not going to respond to a statement. And I think
Yeah. Why are you such an official? Why are you such a terrible official? How about that? Right.
yeah, right. I mean, because I'm not going to change your opinion because you've established that about me, which is
No.
which is
Yeah.
which is fine. Like I really, I think every official has to be fine with with not being liked or not having, the admiration of coaches or fans. Like we have to be, and if we don't, then you're not going to be an official very long if you allow
Well,
for
and
that
that's kind of
behavior.
I'm talking about this from the perspective of a coach and from an
Yeah.
athlete. And I talk about this, but what sort of mindset do you have to go in and be an official?
It's hard to quantify it into one thing, but I will say, I think the mindset that you have. Wow, I'm trying to find how can I word this into put this perfectly, wrap a bow on one sentence.
Yeah.
Man, I think the mindset you have to have is that um, it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when something goes wrong. And then what is my response going to be in that moment? Because it's not, people have to know this, and everybody does. It's not cupcakes and rainbows all the time, So like you have
I
to
don't think
have
there's any of that. I don't think there's any of that as being an official. I
no,
don't know what I like.
you have to have a huge capacity though. Like, so I think capacity is a great word here, because I think you have to have a great capacity, one, for feedback, let alone critical feedback. You have to be willing to take that, and you do. And I think what I would tell, because I think fans and people have a perspective a lot of times that, well, they're getting paid to do it, so they should be able to take my critical feedback. I think that there I think that there is a little bit of truth in that. Like you have to, because that's one part of sports that I think will never fully go away. Right? I mean, fans aren't gonna like sing your praises all the time and just, oh, great call, Stripes. No, they're usually only going to speak up about the bad calls, and so you have to have that mindset of like, okay, here's actually, Matt, a great answer for it. I think the mindset I have to have is that no matter what call I make, 50% of the crowd isn't going to like it, and I think
Right.
because it's against them, and I think they might agree with it, but they're not going to like it. Like, even though you say, oh yeah, he's right, that's a travel, you still don't like that I made the call. You would have rather me passed on it, but I didn't. And so I think when you come to that resolve and that perspective, that's just the nature of competition, and that you don't let it affect you, but that you're only going to be liked every call by half the crowd. Then that's usually, I think, a good starting place for a good mindset.
Feel like it should be prerequisite, like a class, like if as a parent you're getting into your kids starting to play athletics, and
Yep.
I don't care if and I don't care if you played in the NBA or Division 1 basketball. I don't care. When it's your kid, it's different. And I think that you need to go and watch other games that you have no care in the world in who wins,
Yep.
and pay attention to the crowd and
Yeah.
be like, that guy's a jackass up there,
Yeah.
right? Like he's
Yeah.
complaining. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
that call, like he's mad at every call, and then realize that you are so much more biased than you think you are. when
Yeah.
it's your kid out there.
Yeah.
It's like, it's unbelievable. And I think that I do think going up and watching a game that you don't care about and
Yeah.
really paying attention to the calls and the officials and the whole, like you said, this beautiful mess
Yeah.
is going to help you appreciate the entire art form that it is, which it really is. I think that's what I love about it. No amount of athletic talent or physical ability can overcome a poor mindset. Anxiety, fear, and negativity will always diminish an athlete's abilities and limit their success. If you're not intentionally developing your child's mental toughness, then they are not reaching their full potential. Mental Mettle Coaching provides the individual drills needed to build the positive mindset necessary for success on the court and in life. Contact today to schedule a free coaching session and start building mental toughness in your athlete. Mettle is a person's ability to face adversity in a spirited and resilient manner. It is a great skill to have for athletics and for life, but it is not something we are born with. If you want it, you have to forge your mettle. And if you listen to the Mental Mettle podcast, you already know that, but not everybody else does yet. So help me out by ordering and wearing some sweet The Mental Mettle podcast gear. We've got short sleeve tees, long sleeve tees, and some super comfortable hoodies. Order online today and you can have your gear in no time. But the best part is that every order helps support the show and helps me spread the message that mental toughness is a trait that can and should be built. So find the link in the show notes, order your gear, and start showing that you know how to forge your mettle.
Yeah, and I think officials, to your point, I think a lot of I'm more empathetic. I think, Matt, I think a lot of officials are more empathetic than people give us credit for. To be honest with you, because I think most of us are parents, right? So we get that lens of, you're trying to advocate support, and you will, like, we as parents defend our kids sometimes to a fault, and so and I'm guilty of that too. So I am empathetic. I do, Matt, believe that the majority of fans, the majority of coaches understand that what I do is really hard. Like I really think the general population has that perspective, that being a, because do you know why I believe that, Matt? Because not a lot of people want to be an official. Like I know that firsthand.
No, I know.
Because
Yeah,
people know it's really hard, and so I think there's empathy both ways, in a lot of ways, but I don't know. Like my perspective ever changes all the time, and it's changing as my kids get older too. Like I'm as my own parent, and I'm coaching my kids now, but I know that I'm not always going to be coaching them, and I'll be sitting in the bleachers, so we'll see,
Casey, it's
Matt.
like
We'll see how
I
well
mean,
I behave. I don't know. Maybe me being official doesn't help me. I don't know. We'll see.
No, it will, because it will. I know who you are, and I know what you're like. It will do it. You're gonna be fine, but you're gonna be like, oh, like your empathy now is gonna be like a whole lot more. You're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I have to. These urges I'm having to fight are like, it's so instinctual. It's so instinctual that I understand it. And it's man, I grew up I was glad. I'm glad I started coaching before my kids went through it, because I understood that a little bit, because I'm a passionate individual, and I could have seen it going, the wrong way. And I say that because, man, I'm sure my dad has listened to this, but I mean, holy cow. Like, he is like so passionate about it, and he has been since I was playing. My brother went through, my youngest brother, and now my his grandkids are coming through, and man, it's just the passion there, and it comes from the best place, right? And and that's the best part about it is, but yeah, I can remember in my school growing up, I've had several, like, board members get ejected from games, right?
Yep.
Like it's which is people are like, oh, you can't do that. I'm like, you can whenever you're that passionate and you
Yeah.
love when you love the game and you love your school so much
Yeah.
that's that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, that's what makes it so much fun,
And
but
yeah.
it is
Yeah.
difficult.
It is, and I want to preface my last statement by saying I think people empathize knowing how hard officiating is. I think every official knows coaching's really hard too, right? Coaching's
Oh,
really hard, and again, and that's why we don't have people lining up at the doors to coach either. So this is like everything in whatever sport. I think basketball and volleyball always tend to like every sport has a different complexity, I think, to it of why it makes that particular sport challenging. Like baseball and softball, there's wait time, there's delays all the time between every single pitch, right? And sometimes that's great for a pace of a game as an official, but it also is more silence. There's more time for people to constantly give you that
yeah.
feedback. The game of basketball is so fast flowing, so where you don't get that. But the thing about basketball is you're right on top of each other. Like everyone's
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Like you can't hide like you can in football. Like and
No.
football's hard for its different reasons, right? It's challenging there too. But basketball is so interesting because it's such an I don't know if this is the right word, but I'll just use it. It's such an intimate sport just by confines.
Oh,
You're right. You're right. I mean, Matt. Like there was probably times I was constantly within breathing distance of you, as a coach,
yeah.
right? So you're right
Yeah.
there. Like like there's such a kind of personal space aspect of it, and I think, and that's just not for everybody. Like I get it. Like I think the basketball
Oh,
officials always feel like they're in the spotlight, all the time, and metaphorically speaking, and in reality, like you just are, and so. Um, but yeah, it's just
yeah, and I think that whole it kind of brought me up. It's whenever coaches, when you're talking about coaches, sometimes focus on the official too much, and you're talking about how hard coaching is.
yeah,
I think that sometimes whether coaches know they're doing it on purpose or not, if you're shifting some of that blame to an official, it's less on you, right? It's
that's
like,
a
oh,
great
I think we'd have won
yeah,
this game. Coach is doing a good job if you just the officials would do it, and they're not like. And I don't think coaches do that on purpose, but I think it's easy to.
no,
I mean, you're an easy
yeah.
scapegoat. Easy scapegoat.
I don't say this, Matt, from an official standpoint. Slightly more from me from my coaching days. I really do believe this. So maybe if there's coaches listening, this is an official's perspective, and I don't say this to be critical, but I do think the more going back to that statements comment, the more time coaches spend making statements to an official, and again, I'm speaking from when I coached too, because I was guilty of
Yeah.
this too. To me, that usually leads back to some form of insecurity that they have as a coach in whatever way. I want to
Yeah.
fill the air with a more critical statement to an official that I really can't control that, but that's what I'm going to lean on rather than coaching my kids in spite of the adversity. And so that was a great reflection time for me as a coach. Like, why am I filling the space talking to something that I can't control, talking about something I can't control, rather than coaching my kids to what I can control. And to the official barking back at a coach, does it speak to some sort of insecurity that way too? And so talk about mental
It's
resiliency and resiliency to your convictions, who you are. I think that's a big learning piece for officials and
it's
coaches both. Yeah.
Dude, there's so many egos going around, right? It's so hard because we have them when you're competitive, like most officials played some sports, so the coaches played and they were good at it, and it's like it's so much ego and it's so hard. And I'm not like I
Yeah.
know you and where you're coming from. You're not just knocking coaches. We were just saying it
No.
is hard. It is so hard, and I think
It's
that
hard.
that self recognition and self awareness is so important
Yeah.
on how am I talking to an official? How is it affecting my team? And I know you said that, and some coaches say, "Hey, I talk to the official, and you don't say anything," but you're giving that you're putting that seed in their head that
Yep.
we're not succeeding because of the official. And that makes it feel like that feels a lot of angst. And
lot of angst. Yeah, it's a
and
great
it
word.
doesn't give the kids as much to focus on positively. Right? It's like, hey, it's too much. It's like, hey, if coach is mad about these officials and they're not doing this, there's nothing I can do, right? I could play harder, I could do this, or I could really get in a stance better. But why would I get in a stance if he's just going to call a foul on me, right? So
exactly.
I think it takes away from what your kids are trying to do if you're spending way too much time, as you said, like statements and even questions.
Yeah,
but that's my perspective.
So true, Matt. No, it's a good one. And Matt, I followed your stuff for long enough now as a coach to know this. Like one thing that like you might not word it this way, but a lot of your themes that even you coach on come back to controlling what you can control. And I think and along those lines, building a capacity for resiliency goes hand in hand with the skill of not allowing for the things you can't control to fully influence your choices and kind of how you react. And same for me as an official though. Like I mean, man, it's just those. And I think early on in my officiating days, I allowed for the things I couldn't control affect me, and probably some games, Matt, like made me then make choices that were about me and not about the game or not about the player, but that were about me. And I think, and I think as an official, like the thing that would haunt me the most is if one of my partners on my crew said, "You made that about you," and I think because that means I didn't have a capacity for resiliency, and that when that's the number one thing that I'm trying to develop and grow, because it isn't about me. And I think if there's one thing coaches can't stand, if there's one thing fans can't stand, is when an official makes it about them, because it's so obvious when that happens, and we as officials are guilty of that sometimes, and it's very obvious when it's happening. And so I try to be mindful of that. Naturally, I'm a very you know this about me. One, I'm 6'3", so I'm tall. I'm a big guy. But I'm charismatic. I'm flamboyant. I'm charismatic. Like I tend to have a big personality, right? And so I think that I try to use that to my benefit as an official. I really do, because in the end, officiating is kind of like theater. It really is. It's kind of like theatrics sometimes. And so you're kind of you have a stage. Not to make it about you, but just I think you have to have a level of charisma to be a great official. But there's such a fine balance,
and it makes it. You did everything with a smile and a good demeanor, and not like a cocky, like I'm in charge type smile. But and I think that it so matters, but it also matters, for the coach. Like if you're scowling at everything you say towards like it doesn't. I know.
Did you know?
So
I'll say his name because I'm about to talk about him glowingly. Did you know Terry Thompson at all? Another official, Terry. Okay. Yeah. As a basketball player, Terry was my favorite official, and I always told Terry that, even when I worked with him as an official and I was on his crews, because Terry had this ability, this gifting, to kind of flow in and out of mood and demeanor, but in the end to always keep things light, and knew how to talk to players in such a productive way. Because for the officials listening, like you can help manage a game by opening up your mouth sometimes too in a light way, whether that's a smile, whether that's a joke, whether that's just a really quick comment when you're lining up for some free throws, like, and just keep it light and to bring it back to a game. And I think that I know every game always when you're in it feels like more than a game. I get it. But man, like the really good officials kind of have such a gifting of that. And
It's interesting though when you talk about it being more than a game, and it 100% is. But I think that some of these things that I talk about being able to control what you can and calm down and read the situation and do those things, I think people think that means it's it means we aren't being as competitive as we can. But I think that it's counterintuitive on, like, if you think I'm going to get on every call and I'm going to try to manage every situation and I want to be at the end of the game, like, it's counterproductive, right? Because
Exactly.
you have to take some of the emotion out of it. You just have to. And I think that's one of the things that's hard to do. I know it's hard to do, but I wasn't very good at it. I know I wasn't, but it was hard to get the emotion out of it. And sometimes you have to.
Matt,
All right. So yeah.
One last comment to that really quickly, just to encourage officials and mostly coaches. I'll tell you this, like, my respect for a coach goes through the roof, Matt, when I make a terrible call. And I know it's a terrible call as soon as I make it. And I don't hear a boo from that coach. And he knows it, and everybody knows it. And, I think it just, again, but it gets at what we're talking about. No matter, like, the call, like, have you ever seen an official make a terrible call and change it? Nope. That whistle blew. There's a dead ball now.
Toothpaste is out of the tube, man.
There's correctable errors in basketball.
Yeah.
But not on fouls. So it's just like, and on most violations. And so I think that I just have so much admiration for coaches who know that it's done, can't control it. We all know that was a bad call. We're going to move on in spite of it. And I think, because I'm going to tell you this, Matt, whether they'll admit, most officials know if they make a bad call, it might have been a bad call. And that's life, and that's subjectivity, and honestly, that's why we love our game. So that's the last comment I'll make on that.
It's the imperfection that makes it fun. So last question: what should I have asked you that I didn't? What did we not talk about that I should have? Any last? Yeah.
I would say we should have talked about what makes a bad official. Honestly, and maybe we all just know. I think in some ways we've talked about it a little bit, but I think, like, man, what actually should be things that we should be repulsed by or give critical feedback on to officials, and maybe the answer to it is it's probably never going to be judgment. It's probably going to be the things that are the intangibles, the things that are making it about the official. The officials probably trying to interject too many things that don't actually affect the outcome of the game, but that they are interjecting in to make matters worse. And in the end, that's why I kept coming back to every official should have the mindset of just trying to be helpful. And I think if we all enter into a gymnasium with that mindset of just trying to help and be productive, it's more times than not going to end okay. And I think that is, and if officials are not trying to be helpful or trying to pour fuel on a fire, you know it, and it repulses people. It really does. And so, just try to be helpful, and I think everyone's going to end up in an okay place.
And look, there are some officials that aren't very good, that do all those things wrong. It happens. But I think as a coach, you still have to understand that it's not about you being right.
Yep.
Right. Like, I think that there's that, right? It's what good is it going to do you to get in this match with them? Right. What good's it going to do for you? Right. And it's,
I think a great, we don't have to get into it, but I think a great question at some point in time to talk about, or just to think about, that I think this goes back to personality, that every official thinks about, maybe doesn't think about, but is when to give the T, when not to, and when to bark back and when not to sometimes too. Because I'll tell you this, like, I actually had a Hall of Fame coach, I won't say his name, but you used the terms communicating with me. I had a Hall of Fame coach one time who's since retired, who said, Casey, I actually respected you when you would, instead of just hearing a comment from me, sometimes a statement, a critical statement, and just tee me up right away, you would sometimes bark back at me. And he said, I respected that. and that you were willing to take it and honestly kind of give it back sometimes. And most of the time when I bark back, it tends to hopefully be a little more playful, and it's not personal, because if I don't want people to make it personal about me, I'm certainly not going to make it personal back to them. But I think there is such nuance to being able to, when am I gonna kind of bark back a little bit, or when am I gonna say no? Like that's, and I think again that gets into, I think, building capacity, building resiliency, and again, sometimes giving the tea right away is helpful, and sometimes it's not, and so knowing when to.
Yeah, like you said, that's a whole nother conversation for
I
another time.
know, I know.
The whole etiquette on technicals and not technicals, and it's yeah. I
People,
didn't ever get a
I
lot.
only say it because people do remember those, though, man. I remember every official
Oh,
who teed me up, and I still remember those. I can
absolutely.
remember them.
And you want to see an official get a crowd riled up, give some flair with your technical,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Like a couple, things like really like stomp over there and get a hop skip and then boom and do one of these. Like you gotta get like when it's the grandstanding there, man. That really gets them going, right?
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. If I ever
Yeah.
do that, anyone who's listening, if you ever see me do that, please send me an email and say that was.
I want to see that. I want to see that so much, right? Just to do it, it would be great. It's the same way. Like it always cracks me up. And I know you said you got to be a little bit fluent. You got to be a little bit charismatic with your calls and things like that. But I have seen officials give everybody loves a good charge call, except, those are the most, honestly, those are the most 50-50 calls in the gym, right? And the ones that half are going to think it's great and half think it's awful. But I've seen officials like get 3 hop steps into their call, right? You know what I'm saying? You've seen them, they do three hop steps and then boom, 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 and then get one of those.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're not a cheerleader here, right?
Yeah.
Are you just trying to fire everybody up because it does, right?
Matt, that's such a great point, man. And it's honestly been a big area of growth for me, because early on in my career, and I'm still guilty of it sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I had to have some of my veteran officials come to me, and some of this was like recently, and they had to say, Casey, it's just another call, man. It's just another call, and that's great feedback, because how I make that block charge call, Matt, in the first quarter, as opposed to when it's a tie ball game, 30 seconds left, those should be different. Probably, like a little bit. Like it's just another. Like I get like sometimes when it's a bang bang, like intense time, end of the game, I'm gonna come in, boop, boop, pa, and sell it, because the game is gonna be defined by that call. Some officials might push back to that some, like, and I think that's fine, but I think that gets into officiating gifting. When do you need to sell a call, and when don't you? Because you don't always have to sell calls.
I know.
And I've had to learn.
It's one of my favorite clips of my son. He was in a freshman. He got into a semifinal game with the HOIC. So they're playing at the Shirk. They're doing that. And he gets in, and he's only 5'9" at the time. And he gets in there, and we're playing against EPG, and it's like packed house. And he steps in and takes a charge in like the fourth quarter. And I'm telling you that official went from the baseline almost to the free throw line, getting ready. And I'm like, and it definitely fit the mood, but it definitely, like, as far as it being a highlight, like that official and making that call is half of the reason why it's such a fun highlight, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I love, but it does it. Tell you what, it got the old EPG fans fired up, right?
Exactly. And I think there's
no doubt.
But again, I think that gets back to one of the we talk, I mean, as a principal, I talk with my elementary kids, I talk about social cues all the time. Officials we have to have social cues, though, when we're officiating. And that's another part that makes it challenging sometimes. But again, how to make a call, like I said, when the call is probably not, I don't think any call fully affects the outcome of a game, but some calls have more weight to them. Right.
Yeah,
and so,
no doubt.
And so sometimes your mechanics or your administration of that mechanic or that signal, there has to be a little nuance,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
maybe flair is not the right word, but
Maybe not.
sell the call.
Maybe not, but yeah, selling it and looking confident, no doubt, is all a part of it. Hey, oh wow, Casey, it's been thank you for coming on. I
It's been
appreciate
fun.
it. And
Fun.
any last words?
No, man. I hope everyone enjoy. Well, I don't know when people are going to listen to this podcast, but if you're listening to
Oh, it'll
it
be
shortly after,
yeah.
have a great basketball season. We're just getting started,
It's
so
oh,
it's
I
going to be a fun
recorded
one.
this one on. I recorded this in purpose. It's gonna come out sometime, December. December, we're gonna be right in the thick of it, man.
Yeah,
It's best time of the year. So
it really is, man. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it, man.
you bet. You bet. Thanks, Casey.
Yep.
You can't make chicken salad out of chicken feathers, or perhaps you've heard it or even said the other version. Regardless, good coaches should not blame a lack of success on the players they get to coach. It's a lame excuse, and I'm sorry if that ruffles your feathers. But it's your job as a coach to develop your players. If your athletes lack skill or mental toughness, it's your responsibility to develop it. But how do you make today's athlete tougher without risking breaking them? Well, Mental Mettle Coaching now offers professional development for coaches, explaining how to do just that. The program is called Ember to Inferno, Building Mentally Tough Athletes. It teaches real tools and tangible methods that are proven to increase the mental health and toughness of athletes. The program is available as an in-person seminar or as virtual small group coaching. Don't wish for mentally tough athletes. Build them. Contact Mental Mettle Coaching today. There is an exercise I do with with every client I work with, every athlete that I work with, every coach I work with. It's like one of the first things I do. It's in my professional development. I do with teachers. It's everybody. We talk about focusing on the things we can control and letting go of the things we can't control. Anytime I work with an athlete, make a list of all these things that we do, that we focus on that are not in our control. Do they affect who wins the game, who loses the game, and affect our life? Absolutely. That doesn't mean we can control them. There's a lot more things in life that affect us that we can't control than there are things that we can. And I know that sometimes can make you feel like very down and I don't know, like, oh, well, like, what are we going to do? But I think it's the opposite. It gives us something to focus on, but I digress. One of the things that always comes up, always one of the first things that we come up with for players, athletes of any sport, a thing that they focus on too much that they can't control are the refs, are the umpires, are the officials. It's always there. They always, if I'm working with a kid who is struggling with anxiety, with performance issues, it is always partly due to their focus on officials. Now, if I've got parents listening here, where do you think they get that? Parents that have too much anger towards officials tend to have kids that it can be a struggle for their kids. Anger towards an official is not only wasted energy as a parent, but it can develop anxiety and pressure for the player it certainly doesn't help. And here, let me explain that to you. Here your kid sees if you're up there yelling at an official, or you go home and you're complaining about an official, or any of these things like that, it lets your kid know how much it matters to you. They see that it matters to you that they win and that they succeed, which is okay. But they see all of that anger, focused on something that they have no control over. And it starts to give them that idea of despair, like, oh, we're in a game that I have no control over and there's nothing I can do. And it lead to so many issues, so much. It can lead to apathy. Well, why should I keep getting better? Why should I keep trying whenever there's nothing I can do if the officials are going to be like that? It can lead to anxiety, to pressure, because they're trying to they think they have to overcome the officials every time. And this comes from experience. I'm not just on a crusade here to get, to be on the side of an official, which I think we should be on that side because we're struggling to get officials anymore. And it's a tough job and we should give them the respect they deserved. Are they all perfect? No, but regardless, it's not just for that. It is not helpful for your child, for your athlete, when you start to focus on that too much. I've seen it a lot. And honestly, I was going to give this some well thought out advice for parents, but I'm just going to leave it to this. Stop it. Just stop it. It's not helpful for your kid. It's not helpful for you. It's not helpful for the sport. It doesn't change anything. It's not worth it. It causes some pretty serious damage in the long run. So that's my advice to parents. Coaches, some advice on coaches. Hopefully you picked up some stuff there from coaches. I think I want you to do a little bit of soul searching. So I can't really coach you over the airwaves or over YouTube or whatever, but I think I can throw some questions out there that I want you to do some soul searching, coaches. The first one, Casey in that interview talked a little bit about, what percent needs to be your coaching and how much he thought needs to be directed to your kids versus the officials. And I think that's a great question. What percent of your communication during a game is going towards an official versus towards your players? What is your tone? What are your words? What is your body language towards an official? What does that convey to the official? What does it convey to your players? Your actions, your words, your tone, all that. What influence does it have to your team? What influence does it have to your parents? What influence does it have to your program? Casey said, he mentioned that he notices that as the head of a program, a head coach, the players, the team, the parents, the fans all look to that coach to know how to respond to a call or a situation. So it is what influence are you having? I think that there's an old idea. There was an old Bobby Knight idea that when people would argue with me about that a little bit about, Bobby Knight, rest in peace, was like, he was all over officials all the time, but you never saw his players be affected by it. And I think I've had coaches tell me before, well, it's my job. I'm going to get on it. I'm going to be on the officials, but I'm not going to allow my players to do. Well, Bobby Knight is in the Hall of Fame of coaching. He's won national championship. He is one of the greats, but he's also, he went down a road that I wouldn't suggest you go down. He really struggled. He had some issues down the end of his career. And also, just because, Bobby Knight is, again, in the Hall of Fame for coaching, that doesn't mean you can do what he did, right? Or you might not be where you are. I'm just saying, maybe you're not that guy. Maybe you're not that gal. Like, I think that there are some really good coaches that don't give good examples. And honestly, I feel like in a situation like this, and Bobby Knight's ability to really be hard on officials and not have that transfer to his team and the way they acted, I think he's in the 1% to be able to do that. I don't think that most people can do that, and I don't think it's a good model for you to try to do. I think it's better for you to embody what you want for your players. I'm sorry if I offend any Hoosiers in there, but it's my thoughts on it. And I'm not saying anything bad necessarily about Bobby Knight. I think, if anything, I'm thinking he was able to do that where most people can't. But the next question might go in with that a little bit is what insecurities. Well, this is a thoughtful question. This is going to take some vulnerability, which I really like people to really look into. What insecurities in your coaching are you covering up by arguing with an official? And don't say that, oh, that's not what it's about, because it is. We know it may not be necessarily your insecurities, but it might be your faults as a team. might even be things you can't do much about because your size or whatever. But a lot of times we're trying to work an official to get them to play or call a game in a certain way, to bend it our way to make it better because of something I'm not good at as a coach or something we're not good as the team. And you're focusing on covering up those insecurities or those deficiencies rather than doing coaching to build those deficiencies and build your capabilities. It's some thoughts that's gonna, maybe it's gonna be something you sitting down by yourself or with your staff, and really, that's a tough question. But I think that the toughest questions are the best questions. Look at what you argue about and how can I use that to, improve myself, improve my team. So once you answer those questions, I want you to think about, what are you going to work on? What is your takeaway from this? What you listen to this episode from an official, what's your takeaway? What are you going to work on? Take those questions I just asked. What are you going to work on? What are you going to get better at? It's not going to happen overnight, but what are you going to get better at? How is it going to, and if you get better at that, or when you get better at that, because if you work on it, you will get better at it. How will it positively affect your players? How is it positively going to affect your team? And how is it positively going to affect your program when you make progress? That's what you should be looking for. Like, what do I need to do to make progress? And then what's your why? Like, if I get better at this insecurity and focus on more coaching than less complaining, how's that going to make us make progress? It's a tough thing. I get it. I'm sure if somebody wants to dig up, I've argued with an official when I was coaching too. Of course we have. And I'm not saying you can't do that, but I think that you need to be intentional about the way you treat officials, the way you treat the people. I think they are people, officials. I think it says a lot, the way you can handle and the way you can work with someone, and what you are exemplifying for your players and for our young individuals, our players and our young people. If you are at all interested in more conversations like this on these coaching questions that I gave, and actually having a chance to respond and having a conversation about it, I'd love to see you consider my professional development for coaches. There's some ads in this podcast. You probably saw this, Ember to Inferno. It's professional development. I used to be an educator. I used to be a coach, and I create professional development. I go into schools or we do it online, but it is developed specifically for coaches to help develop mental toughness, not only in their athletes, but in themselves, to help rise above some of these things. And I think that, we oftentimes complain about the lack of mental toughness in our players and this generation coming up. And then at the same point, we're there on the side, like yelling like a crazy person over one foul call. Honestly, that's not mental toughness. Mental toughness is being able to move forward regardless of the situation. And that is not, screaming like that over one foul call is not mental toughness. And I think you need to, if you want your players to have it, you need to embody it as well. So consider that Ember to Inferno program. It can be done in group coaching, in a big group professional development setting, in group coaching and individual coaching. It's really a good process, really good to help you grow as a coach. So consider it. If you're interested, the information and my information is in the show notes. You can check it out. And as always, thank you for listening. This has been the Mental Mettle Podcast, and always remember to forge your metal. Thanks again for listening to the Mental Mettle Podcast, produced by Coraggio Media, sponsored by QuickCut, a video management platform for every level of play, and by Mental Mettle Coaching, helping athletes learn to face adversity in a spirited and resilient way. The Mental Mettle Podcast is created each week to help players develop more mental toughness, and that is something that will help all of us. So help me out and like and share the Mental Mettle Podcast with your friends. Until next time, keep forging your metal.